hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon.
On the morning I was supposed to start my first vacation in 5 years, my son called and said, "Mom, don't worry about a thing. We'll take care of the house." Something in his tone didn't sit right. It was too smooth, too eager, like a salesman rehearsing his smile. I remember standing in my kitchen, suitcase by the door, wondering why those words made my stomach twist. I'm Rosemary Baker, 67, widowed, retired nurse, living alone in the same New Jersey house my husband Richard and I bought 40 years ago. Every corner still holds his voice. The scrape of his chair at breakfast, the faint smell of sawdust from the workshop he built in the garage. I keep his flannel shirts folded in a cedar chest, as if the memory of his warmth could still comfort me through the cold nights. That morning, the air smelled like rain and coffee. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, counting down the minutes until the cab arrived. I was flying to Seattle to see my sister for the first time since Richard passed. It took me months to find the courage, months to admit I needed something beyond grief to keep me alive. Robert, my only son, had insisted on helping with the arrangements. "You deserve a break, Mom," he said. "Patty and I will handle the house. Just relax for once." Relax. That word carried a weight of irony. Every time Robert said, "Relax," it meant trust me. And every time I trusted him, something small went missing. A set of silver spoons, a watch I never found again, a few hundred, that must have been. A banking error. I wanted to believe the best of him. I told myself I was imagining things. That grief made me suspicious. When I stepped outside that morning, the world felt calm. A little too calm. The maple trees swayed in a soft breeze. The driveway smelled of wet earth. Robert's car pulled up and Patty leaned out of the passenger window, sunglasses on, even though the sky was cloudy. "Mom, you look adorable with that hat," she said, laughing like she'd already won something. Her compliments always came, wrapped in a kind of sugar that left an aftertaste. "Thank you, dear," I said, forcing a smile. "Just something simple for the flight." She climbed out and hugged me quick, tight, almost possessive. "We'll keep everything perfect," she said. "Don't worry about a thing." That phrase again, "don't worry about a thing." It was the same thing she said when she borrowed my heirloom necklace for a special dinner and returned it with the clasp broken. The same thing she said when she helped Robert organize my finances after Richard's funeral. Still, I swallowed my unease. She was family, and family deserves trust. Or so I'd been taught all my life. At the airport, I tried to shake the feeling off. The terminal buzzed with travelers, kids tugging on suitcases, the smell of cinnamon pretzels in the air. I texted Robert a quick boarding soon. "Love you both," he replied instantly. "Love you too, Mom. Enjoy yourself." For a moment, I almost believed everything was fine. Then the announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Flight 283 to Seattle has been canceled due to weather conditions." The crowd groaned. People rushed to customer service lines. I just stood there holding my ticket, feeling oddly calm. It was as if the universe had cleared its throat to get my attention. "Maybe it's a sign," the woman next to me said with a sympathetic smile. "Maybe it is," I replied. "A sign of what, though?" I tried rebooking, but the next available flight was 2 days away. I called Robert. No answer. Patty didn't pick up either. The cab driver who'd brought me there was still waiting outside for another fare, so I asked him to take me home. As we drove back through the drizzle, the town looked strange. Familiar streets, unfamiliar silence. The sky had that pure shade it gets before a storm, and every light seemed dimmer than usual. I thought about Richard again, about how he used to say, "When something feels wrong, Rosie, it usually is." By the time we turned onto my street, that feeling had settled deep in my chest. The first thing I noticed was a moving truck parked in front of my house. Big white letters, Eagle Movers. The second was the front door cracked open. I felt my breath catch. For a split second, I told myself it must be a coincidence that maybe the neighbors were moving. But then I saw it. The blue ceramic planter Richard gave me for our 30th anniversary sitting on the curb like trash. I paid the driver and walked slowly up the path. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. From inside I heard voices, Robert's low and hurried, Patty's sharper, impatient. "Just load those boxes first," she said. "Mom won't even notice half of this stuff's gone." I froze. Every word hit like a slap. My pulse thundered in my ears. Patty's laugh followed. "She's too sentimental to sell anything. But someone has to be practical." Robert's voice quieter. "She trusts me, Patty. Don't talk about her like that." Trust. The word twisted like a knife. I stepped forward, pushed the door open. Wider. The sound of packing tape pealed through the air. There in the living room stood my son, my only child, wrapping my wedding china in newspaper. Behind him, Patty was stacking framed photos into boxes. "Robert," I said softly. He spun around. His face went white, then red. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "My flight was cancelled," I said, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Patty jumped in before he could answer. "Oh, Mrs. Baker, we were just helping you. Declutter. Remember? You said you wanted to simplify." I said I wanted to think about it, I whispered. "Not sell my home out from under me." She looked away, biting her lip. Robert set the china down and rubbed his forehead. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. The boxes, the moving truck, the papers spread across my coffee table, a property listing, my house circled in red. I felt the world tilt slightly. My hands went cold. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been planning this?" Robert opened his mouth, closed it again. Patty sighed. "Look, Rosemary," she said, dropping the pretense. "You're living alone in a house that's too big for you. We thought it'd be better for everyone if we handled things. You could move into a nice condo and handle things?" I interrupted. "You mean robbed me?" Her face hardened. "You're overreacting. You've had your time here. It's time to pass things on." Every word pressed down like a weight. Overreacting. Your time. Pass things on. As if my life were an inheritance. They couldn't wait to cash in. Robert tried to step closer, reaching for me. "Mom, please, we just don't." I said not another word. He froze. The same boy who once cried over a broken toy now stood before me, ashamed, caught, silent. I looked around the room. The faded floral wallpaper, the worn carpet, the clock ticking on the mantel. Everything Richard and I had built together. Every sacrifice, every memory. And now I was watching it, disappear box by box. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw them both out. But instead, I did what I'd always done. I stood still, quiet, trembling inside. I remember thinking, maybe this is the moment I finally stopped being the quiet one. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, low and distant. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a promise. I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my voice. I just stood there in my own living room, trying to breathe as my son and his wife packed my life into boxes. The air felt thick, like the house itself couldn't believe what was happening. I could smell dust, cardboard, and the faint trace of my late husband's aftershave from a coat they'd tossed carelessly onto the floor. Every memory I'd held on to for comfort now looked like evidence of a crime. Robert wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept staring at the rug, rolling the tape around his fingers like a nervous child. "Mom," he started, "you have to understand." "I understand. Plenty," I said quietly. "You were stealing from me." Patty crossed her arms. "It's not stealing if the family benefits. We're trying to take care of things before it's too late." Too late for what? For me to still be alive? I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. She said it like I was some project to finish, a burden they'd been carrying. Her voice was calm, confident, practiced. She didn't even look embarrassed. That calmness cut deeper than shouting ever could. Robert tried. Again. "Mom." You always said you wanted us to be comfortable. We thought you'd be okay with it once I saw what? My house empty. My voice cracked. You thought I'd be proud? He rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. That same sigh he used to give me as a teenager when he'd been caught lying. It's not like that, he said softly. We've been struggling. Patty's hours got cut. The mortgage, the bills. I stared at him, and instead of asking for help, you decided to help yourselves. The truth landed between us like a stone. His eyes filled with shame. But Patty stayed cold. You don't get it, Rosemary, she said, using my first name. Now that stung more than anything. You've been sitting on all this stuff, clinging to the past. It's not healthy. You should be grateful we're doing the hard work for you. Grateful. She actually said that. I felt something inside me tighten. Not rage exactly, but a heavy kind of clarity. For years I'd let little things slide. The missing jewelry, the sudden loan requests, the way Patty always looked around my house like she was shopping. I told myself it was harmless. But this wasn't harmless. This was betrayal wearing a polite smile. Robert finally looked up at me. His eyes were red. Mom, please, he whispered. We thought we could fix things. Sell the house, pay off the debt, get ahead a little. You'd still have money. You could move closer to Aunt June. He made it sound logical, almost noble. That hurt the most. How reasonable he sounded while standing in the middle of my half-empty living room. I walked over to the window. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel. The moving men were standing near the truck, pretending not to notice. My roses swayed in the wind, petals shaking loose one by one. I pressed my hand against the cool glass and took a long breath. When I turned back around, I saw Patty placing one of Richard's old fishing trophies into a box marked garage sale. That tiny act, that careless flick of her wrist, snapped something inside me. Put that down, I said. She paused, half smirking. It's just clutter, Rosemary. It's my clutter, I said louder this time. My memories, my life. You don't get to decide what they're worth. For the first time, she seemed unsure. Robert stepped between us. Mom, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Harder, I repeated. You've been taking things behind my back for months, and I'm the one making it hard. He didn't answer. The silence told me everything I needed to know. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Get out, I said calmly. Both of you. Robert hesitated. Mom, please take your hands off my things, I said, my voice shaking but steady. And get out before I call the police. Patty scoffed, muttering something under her breath. But she started motioning for the movers to stop. Robert stood still for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Okay, he said quietly. We'll go. They began unpacking what they'd taken, setting boxes back inside, piece by piece. Each time I saw one of my belongings return, I felt both relief and a deeper sadness. Every photo frame, every dish, every book had been something I'd chosen with love, and now each one felt tainted. When the last box was carried back in, the house looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The air was heavy with something broken. Patty brushed past me on her way out. You're making a big mistake, she said flatly. Robert was only trying to help. I didn't reply. I just watched her walk down the path, heels clicking against the wet pavement. Robert lingered by the door. For a second, I thought he might apologize, but he just looked at me, tired, guilty, small, and said, I'll call you tomorrow. When the truck finally drove away, I sat down on the edge of the couch and let the silence fill the room. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the kind of silence that hums with disappointment. I looked at the photo of Richard on the mantel. You were right, I whispered. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Outside, the rain started to fall. Slow, steady, and cold, washing the dust off the porch, one drop at a time. That night, after they left, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that keeps you awake. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a memory trying to speak. I sat in the living room with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the boxes they'd left half-packed. The tape was still hanging from the dispenser, the scissors resting on my table like evidence. My son's fingerprints were on everything, and so were the cracks in my trust. I kept asking myself, why? Why would my own child do something like this? I thought of the times I'd stayed up late helping him with homework, the scraped knees I'd cleaned, the lunches I'd packed, the way he used to call me Mommy when he had nightmares. That boy wouldn't have taken from me, but the man he became. I didn't recognize him anymore. The next morning, I called Florence, my neighbor and closest friend. She was the kind of woman who always smelled like fresh laundry and told the truth even when it hurt. When I told her what happened, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Rosemary, you can't let this go. You need someone to witness whatever happens next." An hour later, she was on my porch with 2 cups of coffee, and that look in her eyes, the kind that said she wasn't leaving until I stood up for myself. Together, we started putting things back where they belonged. But the more we worked, the more I realized how much was missing. The silver tray Richard's parents gave us for our wedding, the locket he wore during his deployment, my mother's brooch gone. When I texted Robert asking where those items were, he responded hours later, "Mom, calm down. We already sold a few things to pay for the moving truck. We'll replace them later." Replace them? As if you could replace love or memory or the last piece of someone you lost. I stared at his message until the words blurred. That was the moment I stopped shaking and started thinking. Florence looked over my shoulder. "You're not going to let them walk away from this, are you?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "Not this time." Later that afternoon, the sound of a car door closing pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked through the window and saw Robert and Patty walking up the path again. I could feel the pulse in my throat. Florence stood beside me, straightening her shoulders. When they walked in, Patty spoke first. "We came to fix things," she said, her tone already defensive. "We thought maybe we could talk like adults before this gets out of hand." I motioned toward the boxes. "You mean before I called the police?" Her smile faltered. Robert stepped forward. "Mom, please. We made a mistake. We just got ahead of ourselves." I studied his face, searching for the sun I raised. "You didn't make a mistake," I said softly. "You made a choice." Florence crossed her arms, watching them both. "A choice to lie and steal," she added. Patty turned on her, annoyed. "This isn't your business." "It is," Florence replied calmly. "When I'm the one who's been watching your mother cry all night." Robert's voice cracked. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said. "And you knew you were doing it. You signed papers to list this house for sale. You sold my jewelry. You lied to me for months." He covered his face with his hands. Patty, impatient, muttered, "She's exaggerating. It's not as bad as she's making it sound." That tone, dismissive, arrogant, made something rise inside me that I hadn't felt in years. I remembered the day Richard proposed to me in this very room. He'd promised that as long as we were together, this house would always be my home. He worked himself to the bone to make that true, and now his son was trying to erase it for a quick profit. I walked to the table where the listing papers still lay. I held them up. "You wanted to sell this house while I was away without my consent." Robert looked down, unable to speak. "This reminded me," I said quietly, "of the day your father and I first moved in here. We couldn't afford curtains for months, but we didn't care. We built something. Together. Every nail, every brick. We earned it. And now you were going to take it away like it was just another transaction." Patty rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic. We were trying to help you. You can't live alone forever." I could have yelled. I could have thrown her out right then. But instead, I took a breath and chose silence. Not weakness, but control. "Florence," I said, "please start recording." Patty froze. "What are you doing?" Making sure there's no misunderstanding this time, I replied. I want you both to say exactly what you've been doing out loud. Robert's face went pale. Mom, say it, I insisted. He hesitated, then whispered. We took some things to sell. We were going to use the money to start the process of selling the house. Florence's phone captured every word. When he stopped, the room went still. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall. Steady, certain, like it had been waiting for this moment. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. Now you're going to unload every last box from that truck, and then you're going to leave. Robert looked like he might argue, but Patty grabbed his arm. Let's just do it, she said through gritted teeth. I stood in the doorway with Florence, watching as they carried everything back inside. Rain began to fall again, light but steady, drumming softly against the porch roof. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel afraid. I felt like the ground beneath me belonged to me again. When they were done, Robert stopped in front of me. I don't know how to fix this, he said quietly. You don't, I replied. But I do. Patty muttered something about me being cold, but I didn't care. Let her think what she wanted. As they walked out, Florence put her hand on my shoulder. You handled that better than anyone I know. I looked at the rain streaming down the window and felt something loosen inside me. I just stopped helping people who only came to take, I said. Outside, the moving truck pulled away. Its headlights cut through the dark like two fading promises. I watched until it disappeared, the rain washing everything clean, the driveway, the steps, and finally my heart. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, locks, and phone calls. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just moved one calm step at a time, like someone walking through the ruins of a house that used to feel safe. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. I watched him replace every lock in silence, listening to the steady rhythm of his tools. The sound was strangely comforting, like closing a door on something that had already died. Florence sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a stack of papers. You should call your lawyer next, she said before they try anything else. She was right. My lawyer, Gilbert, had handled Richard's will years ago. When I told him what happened, he asked me to come in immediately. I drove there the next morning, hands tight on the steering wheel. The autumn, leaves blowing across the road. I told him everything, the forged documents, the attempted sale, the confession Florence had recorded. He listened quietly, nodding, then said in his calm, steady way, We can fix this, Rosemary, but we'll do it by the book. He showed me the document Robert had filed, a power of attorney that would have let him sell my house, manage my bank accounts, and sign contracts in my name. My stomach turned as I realized how close I'd come to losing everything. He could have taken it all, I whispered. Gilbert looked at me with kind eyes, but he didn't. And now you'll make sure he never can. I signed the papers, revoking every right over my affairs. As I did, I thought about all the times I'd told him, You can always count on me. I'd said it without realizing he'd started counting on me for the wrong reasons. When I left the office, the air felt sharper, the sunlight colder. My resentment had shifted. It wasn't about the money or the objects anymore. It was about the way they'd treated me, like I was fading, like I didn't notice things anymore. That quiet insult cut deeper than theft. A few days later, Robert called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. His voice was tired. Mom, I got a letter from your lawyer, he said. Yes, I replied. That's how legal matters work. He sighed. Patty's furious. She says you're ruining us. Ruining you? I repeated slowly. I didn't make those choices, Robert. You did. There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I thought I was helping. I closed my eyes. You took things from me because you thought I wouldn't notice. That's not helping. That's deciding my worth. He didn't argue. For the first time, he sounded small again, like the boy who used to come to me after he'd done something wrong, hoping love would fix it. But love doesn't erase consequences. It never should. Patty called next. Her tone was sharper, cold enough to sting. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You've destroyed this family." I held the phone a moment before answering. If holding people accountable destroys a family, then maybe it wasn't much of one to begin with. She hung up without another word. I sat there staring at the quiet phone, feeling an unexpected calm. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was something steadier, the kind of peace that comes when you stop apologizing for protecting yourself. Later that week, Gilbert called with an update. "Robert signed the restitution agreement," he said. "He's agreed to repay the value of what was taken. It'll take time, but it's official now." "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady, but my chest felt heavy. Justice doesn't erase the pain, but it does close the wound a little. That night, I walked through my house. I touched the table Richard built, the curtains I sewed, the photographs lined. Along the hallway, they were still mine, not because I'd fought for them, but because I'd remembered they had value. I had value. Florence came by the next day with a basket of muffins. She sat across from me, sipping coffee. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "I know," I said. "It just doesn't feel good yet." She nodded. "It will. Peace usually feels empty at first." I thought about that after she left. She was right. The house felt too quiet now, but at least it was. My silence, my locks, my peace. In the weeks that followed, news reached me through neighbors. Robert and Patty were living apart. He'd moved into a small apartment near his job, and she'd gone to stay with her sister. Some part of me wanted to feel pity, but I couldn't. I had carried guilt for everyone else my whole life. This time I refused. One afternoon, I got a message from Robert. "I'm working double shifts. I'll pay you back, Mom. I promise." I didn't respond. I just looked at the message for a long time, then set my phone down. Promises didn't mean much anymore. Actions did. As I locked my door that evening, I looked at the key in my hand. For years, that key had meant safety, belonging, family. Now, it meant freedom, the right to decide who could walk through that door and who never would again. The leaves had started to turn gold by the time I felt the house breathe again. The chaos was gone, the silence softer now. I could walk through each room without feeling that sharp sting of betrayal pressing behind my ribs. It had been weeks since Robert signed the restitution papers, weeks since Patty's last angry call. Life had finally gone quiet, almost too quiet, and in that stillness, I began to hear myself again. I spent my mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the sun rise over the maple trees Richard planted. They'd grown tall, sturdy, unbothered by time. I wanted to be like that, steady, rooted, impossible to move. But healing wasn't simple. Every day, a little resentment tried to sneak back in. A stray thought, a memory, a word from someone who didn't understand. The worst came when neighbors asked about Robert. "He's a good boy," they'd say, shaking their heads. "He just lost his way." Those words used to hurt. Now they only reminded me how invisible mothers become once their children grow up. Everyone remembers what we gave. No one remembers what we lost. One morning, an envelope arrived. It was from Robert. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check. The first payment. His handwriting was uneven, like he'd written it in a rush. "Mom, I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying. I got a second job. Patty's gone. I don't expect forgiveness, just a chance to make things right." I held that letter for a long time. His words hurt, but they also carried something fragile, a small echo of the boy I once knew. For the first time in months, I felt something softer than anger. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was close. That weekend, Florence came by with pie and her usual warmth. "He'll come around," she said, cutting the first slice. Guilt has a way of teaching people who never listened before. "I don't know if I want him to come around," I admitted. "I just want peace." "You already have it," she said gently. "You just don't recognize it yet." Her words stayed with me. That night, I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the frames holding my family's faces. I realized I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I was letting it stand where it belonged. It didn't own me. It simply existed. Days passed quietly until one afternoon I received another message. This time from Patty, just a few words. "You ruined our lives. Hope you're proud." I stared at the screen, expecting anger to flare, but nothing came. I just felt tired, not from her words, but from how predictable they were. For years, I had carried other people's opinions like heavy luggage. That day, I finally sat down. I deleted the message, blocked her number, and went outside to sit in the fading sunlight. The air smelled of rain and pine. The street was quiet except for the sound of children playing in the distance. I thought about how much time I had wasted trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I thought about Richard, how he used to tell me, "Kindness doesn't mean letting people walk all over you, Rosie. It means knowing when to close the door." As the light faded, I felt something shift inside. Not anger, not sorrow, but strength. I realized I could care about my son without carrying his mistakes. I could wish him well without letting him back in. That was my peace. Not the kind that asks for understanding, but the kind that simply stands firm. Later that evening, I checked my email one last time. Buried among bills and promotions was a message from a stranger. She wrote that she'd read about my story in a local community column, how I had stood up for myself, how I'd refused to stay silent. I just wanted to say, "Thank you." She wrote, "Your courage reminded me I can say no, too." I sat there reading it over and over. It felt like someone had reached through the quiet and handed me a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. I realized that strength isn't loud. It doesn't always come with victory speeches or applause. Sometimes it's just a woman locking her own door and choosing not to open it again. When I went to bed that night, I left one lamp on in the hallway. The soft light touched the family photos on the wall. Richard smiling, Robert as a boy, me holding him at the beach. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I looked at those pictures. I felt gratitude. I'd loved. I'd been betrayed, and I'd survived it all. Standing by that new lock, I whispered to myself, "Not every closed door is anger. Some are protection." I took a deep breath, feeling the quiet settle around me like a promise. And in that stillness, I understood something I wished I'd known long ago. I don't have to deserve love to be worthy of peace. If you've ever felt invisible, remember this. You are still here. You are still enough.
Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon. Thanks for watching.